Tales of the Empire gave us some extra details around some lesser known characters in Star Wars. But it also gave us a really crazy reveal that has me starting to theorize what the heck is going on. Welcome to Star Wars Uplink. Both Tales of the Empire and Tales of the Jedi gave us some interesting looks into Star Wars, but in my personal opinion, and what I like out of these kinds of shows in other mediums, it didn't really hit for me. There were some great moments that added extra context, and the whole story with Morgan Elsbeth I really appreciated because it gave us some good depth to her character and some understanding of why we see her later on in the series, and gave her even more importance in Ahsoka, which is what these stories are really good at. They should be these fun little experiments in the Star Wars galaxy that add some context and some, added flair to existing characters or existing experiences or even existing lore and eras. But while I didn't necessarily enjoy the direction they took with Barriss Offee's character, and there are multiple reasons for this, the insistence that they have in making Tales of the Empire and Tales of the Jedi be this really weirdly lengthy, but not necessarily lengthy anthology hopping in between various time points, but also not giving the characters enough detail and experience or really character development there. But that's not the point that I want to get into in this video. The point I really want to get into is around something in Barriss Offee's story. One big reveal that came out of Tales of the Empire, specifically in the second stories, was Merrick, a character we saw in Ahsoka that I just found really intriguing that this would be in Tales of the Empire. So the journey that Barriss Offee takes in Tales of the Empire is around her development from being a Jedi, being put into prison, then getting taken from prison and given the opportunity to train as an Inquisitor, and that process of her going down this path. Ultimately, not necessarily agreeing with the efforts, seeing really being brainwashed into thinking that the Empire is a better version of the Republic, and then them proving that it actually isn't that. And ultimately comes to her redemption and going away from the idea of the dark side and the Inquisitorius. So that's generally the story arc that they have with her story. It's a pretty standard redemption story. The interesting piece is around the Inquisitors, which we didn't necessarily get a whole lot of detail into or much context in terms of how they fit into the Empire, one of the gripes that I have with it. But something that we did see are some new or lesser explored Inquisitors in this pack. And that part was really interesting. The one that I'm really fascinated with is Merrick. And Merrick's this character that in Ahsoka, we were all theorizing on who this could be, what is going on, how does an Inquisitor survive the fall of the Empire and continue to be effective and worn and just really intriguing as a character. And then they were like, actually, no, we're not going to explore that at all in Ahsoka, and they're just some I assume Night Sister magic to keep them running, and it's just an empty suit. Now, we don't get any more context around Merrick as a character or any details around them. They don't open their helmet, they don't speak. There's nothing around this character and what they do. The only thing that we have is the fact that they're there. That is all. But that's not going to stop me from theorizing on what's going on here, and just the fact that they are there after what they did to this character in Ahsoka. There are tons of questions with this character. Why are they here? This is something that I kind of got the impression in Ahsoka that this is just a Night Sister creation. This wasn't something that truly came from a time period before. I almost got the impression that this was just unused Inquisitor gear and that was it. But now that we see Merrick in Tales of the Empire, we know now 100% sure that Merrick is or was an Inquisitor. We don't have any confirmation on if they are just this wisp of smoke underneath the mask still. We don't know any details on that front. But I do want to ask the question of like, what is going on here? Are there more Inquisitors that we haven't seen? This just makes me want to see more Inquisitor stuff. I really wish we could get like an Inquisitor show. Like Barriss would have been a perfect character to really flesh this out into her own show and get into that extra content, get into that extra detail. Show us really what it takes to become an Inquisitor and make her shift away from the Inquisitors really impactful instead of like this random thing that just happens. Like, you signed up for this. How do you get through that? How do you go through the things that you've already done and then make it past and then decide to not do it? That's something that I really wish that they touched on. I don't want to get my hopes up because I highly doubt that they would ever go this route, because it seems like it's impossible to do a truly dark side story in Disney Star Wars or Disney canon. And it's understandable. They didn't do a dark side story when it wasn't Disney. They did it in the books, and there's examples of that across the Star Wars galaxy and universe in the books, that they have a ton of those kinds of stories, but it just doesn't seem possible so far in Star Wars in the current day and age. When we got this like marketed version of a dark side story with Battlefront 2's campaign, it just ended up becoming a redemption story. And I understand the need or want to do a Star Wars redemption story. That is ultimately what the original trilogy is all about, like going so far off the deep end as Darth Vader and then being able to like come back from that. That's a huge part of the original trilogy. But it doesn't need to be every single story. And also, they don't necessarily do it all that well. Whenever they have a redemption story, they don't truly make it worth the redemptive arc. They don't give us the context or the character development or anything like that for it to make sense for the character. It's like, oh, one day they just wake up, and it's like, no, ultimately, it is a bunch of things that go into turning a character from their beliefs to something else. There's oftentimes a big moment in those kinds of stories, but more than likely it's just it's a feeling that you've had this whole time. And they got into it a little bit with Barriss. That was definitely there in her character and her story, but we didn't get any extra context or any detail with that shift. And that's something that I would love to see. I'm not 100% against it. I'm just against the kinds of redemptive stories that they have in Disney Star Wars, because oftentimes they do take the easy way out with it. It's like, oh, we've written ourselves into a corner with this character. They're too evil or anything like that. Well, the only way to go forward is to make them good again. And that's not necessarily the story I want to see. So I'm interested to see what Acolyte does, because they're marketing it very heavily into the dark side aspect. But we'll see if they're actually capable of making a dark side specific story, because up until this point, they haven't. I ultimately just wanted to point this out in Tales of the Empire and dive a little bit deeper into, like, man, they did it. They made Merrick into an actual Inquisitor. They showcased that they are there in the background in some form or fashion at some point in the past. Let me know your thoughts on what the purpose of Merrick could be. Are they going to do an Inquisitor type show? Are they even capable of doing something like that? Let me know in the comments below. Check out our podcast, and may the Force be with you.